It was 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday when the unthinkable happened. The hum of the office was steady, the kind of low, constant buzz that made time feel like it was melting into itself. Desks were islands of productivity, screens flickering with spreadsheets and emails, and the air was tinged with the faint aroma of burnt coffee and ambition. In the corner office, Victoria Lane, CEO of Lane Tech Logistics, was finishing her third espresso of the day, her gaze fixed on the city skyline beyond the glass. She was the kind of boss who never missed a detail, who could spot a typo in a quarterly report from across the room, who remembered every birthday but never celebrated her own. Her presence was a force, sharp, composed, and, as her staff whispered, a little intimidating. For 3 years, her executive assistant, Ethan Cole, had been the silent engine behind her efficiency. He arrived at 7:43 a.m. every morning, never a minute early, never a minute late. He anticipated her needs before she voiced them, kept her calendar running with the precision of a Swiss watch, and never once asked for anything in return. Ethan was the kind of assistant who made himself invisible, blending into the background, always present but never intrusive. The staff called him the Ghost, not because he was cold, but because he was reliable in a way that felt almost supernatural. But today, something was different. Ethan's routine was unbroken until, at 4:47 p.m., he stood up from his desk, smoothed the front of his shirt, and walked toward Victoria's office with a calmness that belied the ripple he was about to send through the entire floor. He knocked once, a soft, practiced sound, and waited for her clipped, "Come in." Victoria didn't look up from her laptop as he entered. She was reviewing a contract, redlining clauses with the kind of ruthless efficiency that had made her feared and respected. "What is it, Ethan?" she asked, her tone neutral, eyes still on the screen. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for her to notice. "Miss Lane, I need to leave early today." The words hung in the air, strange and foreign. Victoria's fingers paused over the keyboard. She looked up, her expression unreadable. "Excuse me?" Ethan met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "I need to leave early. I have a date." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The office, usually a symphony of movement and noise, fell silent. Even the city outside seemed to hold its breath. Victoria's mind raced, searching for context, for precedent. In 3 years, Ethan had never left before 6:30 p.m. He'd worked through holidays, stayed late during crises, covered for others without complaint. He was the constant in her ever-shifting world. "A date?" she repeated, her voice softer, almost incredulous. "Yes," Ethan replied, his tone even, respectful, but with a hint of something she couldn't quite place. Defiance, maybe, or hope. Victoria's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in confusion. She realized with a jolt that she knew almost nothing about Ethan's life outside these walls. She didn't know where he lived, what he did on weekends, if he had family or friends. She'd never asked, and he'd never offered. Their relationship was built on boundaries, clear, professional, unyielding. She cleared her throat, searching for the right response. "Is everything all right?" Ethan nodded. "Everything's fine. I just promised someone I'd be there tonight." Victoria studied him, searching for cracks in his composure. She saw none. He was as calm and collected as ever, but there was a new energy about him, a quiet determination. She felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest, a tightness, a flicker of jealousy she didn't want to acknowledge. "Of course," she said finally, her voice measured. "Go ahead." Ethan nodded, a small, grateful smile flickering across his lips. He gathered his things, his phone, his battered leather bag, a coffee mug with the faded words, "World's Best Dad," and walked toward the door. As he left, Victoria watched him go, her mind spinning. She told herself it didn't matter, that his personal life was none of her business. But as the door clicked shut, she felt the weight of his absence settle over her office like a shadow. The rest of the staff noticed too, Whispers rippled through the cubicles. Ethan left early? For a date? The ghost has a life? The news spread like wildfire, and for the first time, Victoria felt exposed, as if a part of her carefully constructed world had shifted without her permission. She tried to refocus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Ethan. Who was he meeting? What kind of person had drawn him away from his unbreakable routine? Was it someone from the office? Someone he'd met online? Did he have friends she didn't know about? Family? Children? The questions gnawed at her, each one more unsettling than the last. She realized with a pang that she'd taken Ethan's presence for granted. He was the one person she could rely on, the one constant in a world that demanded everything from her and gave nothing back. And now, for the first time, she wondered what her life would look like without him. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across her office, Victoria sat alone, staring at the empty space where Ethan's desk used to be. She felt a strange mix of emotions: confusion, jealousy, regret. She told herself it was ridiculous, that she was overreacting, but the feeling wouldn't go away. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Ethan was living a life she'd never touched, making memories she'd never be part of. For the first time in years, Victoria felt truly alone. The city lights flickered on, one by one, as dusk settled over the skyline. Victoria pressed her forehead to the cool glass, watching the world below move on without her. She tried to shake off the feeling, to remind herself that she was the boss, that boundaries were necessary, that professionalism was her armor. But the truth was, Ethan's absence felt like a missing piece in a puzzle she'd spent years assembling. She turned away from the window and paced her office, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Her mind replayed the moment, Ethan's calm voice, the way he'd said, "I have a date," the quiet certainty in his eyes. It was so unlike him, so unexpected, that it left her unsettled. She prided herself on knowing everything that happened in her company, on being in control. But this was out of her hands. Victoria sat at her desk and opened her laptop, but the words on the screen blurred together. She tried to focus on the contract in front of her, but her thoughts kept drifting. She wondered what Ethan was doing right now. Was he nervous? Excited? Who was he meeting? Was it someone special? Someone who made him smile in a way she'd never seen? She remembered the mug on his desk, "World's Best Dad." She'd always assumed it was a joke, a gift from a friend or a child he mentored. But now she wondered if there was more to it. Had she missed something important? Had she been so focused on her own world that she'd failed to see the person right in front of her? The office was quieter than usual. The staff, sensing the shift, kept their heads down, their conversations hushed. Victoria felt their eyes on her, felt the weight of their curiosity. She wondered what they thought of her, if they saw her as cold, unapproachable, untouchable. She wondered if they knew how much she relied on Ethan, how much she valued his presence, even if she never said it out loud. She glanced at the clock. 5:30 p.m. The office was emptying out, the day winding down. Victoria gathered her things, slipped on her coat, and made her way to the elevator. As she descended to the lobby, she caught her reflection in the mirrored walls, composed, confident, every hair in place. But beneath the surface, she felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't felt in years. Outside, the air was crisp, the city alive with possibility. Victoria walked to her car, her mind still on Ethan. She thought about calling him, about asking if everything was all right, but she stopped herself. It wasn't her place. He deserved his privacy, his own life outside of work. Still, the urge lingered. She drove home in silence, the radio off, the city lights blurring past her window. Her apartment was immaculate, every surface gleaming, every item in its place. She set her bag down, kicked off her heels, and poured herself a glass of wine. She stood in the kitchen, staring at the city below, and let herself feel the ache she'd been trying to ignore. Victoria thought back to her early days in business. She'd been ambitious, driven, determined to prove herself in a world that didn't make room for women like her. She'd learned to be tough, to keep her emotions in check, to never let anyone see her sweat. She'd built walls around herself, convinced that vulnerability was weakness, that connection was a distraction. But Ethan had been different. He'd never tried to break through her walls, never pushed for more than she was willing to give. He simply did his job quietly, efficiently, always there when she needed him. Over time, she'd come to rely on him, to trust him in ways she didn't trust anyone else. She realized now that she'd taken him for granted, assumed he would always be there, always available. She wondered what his life was like outside the office. Did he have friends, family? Was he happy? She thought about the way he smiled at his phone during lunch breaks, the way he left promptly at 6:30 every night, never a minute later. She'd always admired his discipline, his commitment, but she'd never asked what drove him, what mattered to him. Victoria finished her wine and wandered into the living room. She sat on the couch, pulled a blanket over her legs, and stared at the ceiling. She felt the weight of her own loneliness, the emptiness of her perfectly ordered life. She thought about Ethan, about the possibility that he was out there, right now, sharing a meal with someone who made him laugh, who knew him in ways she never would. The thought stung more than she cared to admit. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. She glanced at the screen, an email from HR, a reminder about tomorrow's leadership meeting. She sighed, set the phone aside, and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she let herself imagine a different life, a life where she wasn't always in control, where she could let someone in, where she could be more than just the boss. She thought about Ethan's words, "I have a date," the simplicity of it, the courage it must have taken to say it. She wondered if she would ever have that kind of courage, if she could ever let herself be vulnerable, to risk rejection, to hope for something more. The night stretched on, quiet and still. Victoria drifted off to sleep on the couch, her dreams filled with images of city lights, empty offices, and a man with a gentle smile who always seemed just out of reach. Morning arrived with a pale wash of sunlight over the city, and Victoria woke to the unfamiliar sensation of having slept on her couch, her neck stiff, her mind foggy. She blinked at the ceiling, piecing together the fragments of last night's thoughts. Ethan, his quiet strength, the way his absence had left her feeling unmoored. She sat up slowly, the blanket slipping to the floor, and for a moment she simply sat there, letting the silence settle around her. She moved through her morning routine on autopilot. Shower, coffee, a quick scan of the news, but everything felt slightly off, as if the world had shifted on its axis. She dressed with her usual precision, but when she caught her reflection in the mirror, she saw something softer in her eyes, a vulnerability she usually kept hidden. She wondered if anyone else would notice. At the office, the atmosphere was different. People moved quietly, casting glances at Ethan's empty desk. Victoria felt their curiosity, their questions, but she kept her expression neutral, her posture straight. She walked to her office, closed the door, and tried to focus on the day ahead. But her mind kept drifting, replaying the events of the previous afternoon. She found herself thinking about Ethan's life outside these walls. She imagined him at breakfast with his child. She was almost certain now that the mug wasn't a joke. Maybe packing a lunch, tying shoelaces, sharing a laugh over spilled cereal. She pictured him smiling, relaxed, a version of him she'd never seen. The image made her chest ache with something like longing. The morning passed in a blur of meetings and emails, but Victoria was distracted. She caught herself staring out the window, her thoughts miles away. She wondered if Ethan would come in late, if he'd call to explain, if he'd even return at all. The uncertainty gnawed at her, a constant low-grade anxiety she couldn't shake. At noon, there was a soft knock at her door. She looked up, heart skipping, but it was only her HR manager with a stack of forms. She signed them absently, her mind elsewhere. When the door closed, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She tried to remind herself that she was the boss, that she didn't need anyone, that she'd built this company from the ground up with nothing but grit and determination. But the truth was, she missed Ethan. She missed his quiet competence, his steady presence, the way he made her life easier without ever asking for recognition. By mid-afternoon, she couldn't take it anymore. She stood up, grabbed her coat, and left her office, ignoring the surprised looks from her staff. She walked through the city, letting the cold air clear her head. She found herself outside a small cafe, the kind of place she'd never noticed before. She stepped inside, ordered a coffee, and sat by the window, watching the world go by. She thought about the choices she'd made, the walls she'd built, the people she'd pushed away. She wondered if it was too late to change, to let someone in, to risk being seen for who she really was. She thought about Ethan, about the courage it took to ask for what he wanted, to put himself first for once. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. An email from Ethan. Her heart leapt, then steadied. She opened it, her hands trembling slightly. "Miss Lane, thank you for understanding yesterday. I know it was unexpected. I wanted to let you know I'll be in tomorrow at my usual time. If there's anything urgent, please let me know. Best, Ethan." Victoria read the message twice, searching for subtext, for some hint of how he felt. It was polite, professional, but there was a warmth to it, a gratitude she hadn't expected. She typed a reply, paused, deleted it, started again. "Ethan, thank you for letting me know. I hope your evening went well. Best, Victoria." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. She stared at the screen, willing him to reply, but the minutes ticked by in silence. She finished her coffee, gathered her things, and walked back to the office, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. The rest of the day passed quickly. Victoria threw herself into her work, determined to regain her focus. But when the office emptied out and the city lights began to glow, she found herself lingering at her desk, unwilling to go home to her empty apartment. She thought about what she would say to Ethan when he returned. She rehearsed the words in her mind. "Thank you. I missed you. I'm sorry for never asking about your life." She wondered if she had the courage to say them out loud. The next morning, Ethan arrived at exactly 7:43 a.m., as if nothing had changed. He unlocked her office, adjusted the thermostat, brewed her coffee just the way she liked it. When Victoria walked in, he greeted her with his usual calm, but there was a new ease in his smile, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. "Good morning, Miss Lane," he said, placing her briefing packet on the desk at a perfect angle. "Good morning, Ethan," she replied, her voice softer than usual. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of their routine restored. But something was different. Victoria found herself watching him, noticing the small details, the way he smiled at his phone, the way he hummed under his breath, the way he seemed lighter, freer. At lunchtime, she surprised herself by inviting him to join her. They sat in the break room, sharing sandwiches and small talk. Victoria asked about his evening, about his child, about the things that mattered to him. For the first time, she listened, not as a boss, but as a person. Ethan opened up, telling her about his son, about the challenges of single parenthood, about the joys and struggles of balancing work and family. Victoria found herself sharing too, her fears, her regrets, her hopes for something more than just success. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, Victoria realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. The walls she'd built were still there, but they were thinner now, more transparent. She saw Ethan not just as her assistant, but as a whole person with dreams and desires of his own. When the day ended, Ethan gathered his things, ready to leave. Victoria hesitated, then spoke. "Ethan, thank you for everything." He smiled, genuine and warm. "Thank you, Miss Lane, for noticing." As he walked out, Victoria felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She knew the future was uncertain, that there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time, she was willing to face them, not alone, but with someone by her side.